Thank you, everyone. I want to welcome everyone for coming today. How many of you are unfamiliar with the Everett Massacre? Show of hands. Okay, I'm going to give you my Cliff Note version of it really fast so I can bring you up to speed. In 1916, lumber mill workers were on strike for restoration of wages given to them 2 years prior. A stalemate had been occurring all summer with escalating violence, some of which involved the industrial workers of the world. The industrial workers of the world came into town and adopted the cause of the lumber mill workers. And instead of helping, kind of hastened a little bit more tension in the city. So today, I want to talk about the people, places, and the process of creating the graphic novel. I want to thank the Everett Public Library and Cameron Johnson for inviting me to speak today, Historic Everett for the wonderful opportunity of creating this graphic novel, and most importantly, my husband, Steve Fox, who was very supportive. So, first of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about the difference between graphics and graphic novels and comics. Comics are usually involving more than one issue and are serialized stories. Usually, they involve a superhero. So, I loved comics as a kid. I've been drawing comics since I was a kid. Here's one that I did when I was about 12 or 13 years old, and you could see the influence of Archie in there. And actually, the guy in the shades is Jack Lord. So I combined a little pop culture in there, too. I began my career as a storyboard illustrator for music videos, commercials, and feature films. Currently, there's many book illustrators who also storyboard for movies and vice versa. So there's a lot of interreaction with the two disciplines. But storyboards are a little bit more technical, and they have shortcuts. For example, the use of arrows to denote action of the camera and action of the actors. It's a little bit more technical because there has to be consideration for location and a physical camera lens. And the drawings have screen directions written in them as opposed to word balloons. With storyboards as well, you don't have to worry about page layout or the composition of the entirety of the page. And eye flow is less of a concern with storyboards. So more recently, I started returning to comics. Some of you might recognize a couple of my dalliances in returning to graphic novels here. What I love about graphic novels is it allows me to be the writer, the director of photography, which is really freeing and liberating. And in some cases, I've been known to bend reality and defy physics. So, the Everett Massacre, a graphic novel? So, Everett has a very devoted community of people that are dedicated toward its history and historic preservation. The graphic novel started as a bug that David Ramstead put in my ear. Thanks a lot, Dave. Where are you? He said, Deb, you should do a graphic novel about the Everett Massacre. And I thought about it, and I said to myself, well, I'm inexperienced as a writer, and I've really never done a graphic novel before, an official graphic novel. But I knew that Everett had wonderful characters in its history, and the idea really intrigued me. These characters that are part of the story are larger than life, and it sounded like a really fun project to tackle. So this is a storyboard illustration that I did for a documentary about World War II. It uses charcoal in it. And this drawing is one that I used to show Historic Everett. And when I went to pitch the idea to them, this is what I showed them. They really liked the idea and agreed to partner with me to do the graphic novel. Certain parameters were set at that time. They really liked the black and white. Being a period piece, it made sense to have it printed in black and white. We limited it to 24 pages. We decided we liked using charcoal because it fit the grittiness and the mood of Everett. And think about, I mean, Everett was a lumber town. What is charcoal but burnt wood? So it just made sense. And also, they gave me a deadline. And the final challenge was to tell the story without taking sides, which proved a big challenge. What I also liked about the idea of creating a graphic novel about this time was it would allow me to transport readers and viewers back in time visually. And that really was exciting to me. I could take my readers inside a dangerous shingle mill, which is what you see here, inside the interurban trolley that used to make the journey from Everett to Seattle, and it's long gone now. Inside a smoky men's club where the power brokers of Everett came together and rubbed elbows. Inside the warehouses on the city dock, and inside the Verona where the shootout occurred. So with Historic Everett and I partnering up to do this piece, it meant now I've got to research and know exactly what happened and examine it from all sides. And for that, I consulted Everett's historians such as David Dilgard, Lisa Labovich, Neil Anderson, Larry O'Donnell, Jack O'Donnell, who generously loaned me his model ship of the Verona, which came in handy. Jessica Pavish for loaning me some books, and my dad, who is a genealogist, and came a little bit of a family affair there. Of course, I had to do some studying and reading of books, and Milltown was the first place that I started with. Milltown by Norman H. Clark, 1970, University of Washington Press. Without a doubt, the most popular book on Everett's history, and it's a thorough and fun read. I recommend it to anybody who's interested in this time period. It presents Everett's history since its founding until the aerospace epoch. Lumber and Politics by Robert E. Ficken, 1979, University of Washington Press. Thanks to Neil Anderson, who recommended this book. This is also a great read, and it told the other side of the lumber baron story. Mark Reed was a so-called lumber baron. We call lumber barons, it's the shingle mill owner, lumber mill owner. And Mark Reed was from Shelton, Washington. His life is nicely detailed in this biography. He was a native son of Washington, a lumber mill owner that really cared for his workers and was trying to get his workers to be comfortable in the job that was not a very easy job and actually quite dangerous. Mark Reed went on to serve in the Washington state legislature and had a career in politics and was lobbying for the lumber industry in Washington. He often severely clashed with Roland Hartley while Hartley was governor. The Everett Massacre by Walker C. Smith. This was published by the IWW Publishing Bureau. The date is uncertain, but I estimate it to be published around 1917. This is the Everett Massacre from the industrial workers of the world point of view. It was a tough read for me, especially the trial parts of it were very tedious to get through. It has gruesome pictures of the victims of the Everett Massacre, but it had great information about Beverly Park, which was quite grisly and pretty much whitewashed in the Everett press at the time. Thanks to Jessica Pavish for loaning me that book. The Evolution of a Vibrant Everett Waterfront by Larry and Jack O'Donnell, 2010, published by Port of Everett. I met early on with Jack and Larry, and they pointed me in the right direction and gave me some great advice on the project. some very useful bios, and information about the massacre and the characters involved. And since I didn't know what I was doing, what does everybody do? They buy the Complete Idiot's Guide, and I was no different. Complete Idiot's Guide to Creating a Graphic Novel by Nat Gertler and Steve Lieber, 2004, published by Penguin Group. This was an absolutely invaluable resource on how to create a graphic novel, and I recommend it for anybody that's thinking they want to do one of their own. It was great for strategizing tasks and developing a methodology, keeping me focused on important story considerations, writing a properly formatted script, which was crucial, staying organized, advice on drawing, page layout, and some helpful do's and don'ts. I also went to Comic-Con. I saw hundreds of great works, got some advice, and met several artists. And more than anything, it was a great day of people watching. I highly recommend it. I also studied other graphic novels, particularly historical graphic novels. These particular graphic novels were bought at the Alcatraz gift shop, and each individual graphic novel told the story of individual prison breaks at Alcatraz. So I'm going to start talking about the historical characters of the story. So Donald Mcrae was a real-life character in the story. He's portrayed as a savage bully sheriff and a drunkard in Walker C. Smith's book about the Everett Massacre. In Milltown, he's portrayed as a pathetic man who turned against his own Union brother and became a hired thug to the rich men of Everett. But little information is known about his life after being sheriff of Snohomish County. He's somewhat a man of mystery and very complex. We know he ended up being a gardener in Olympia for Roland Hartley's gubernatorial administration. Then he spent years as a recluse in Thurston County, and no information on his date or where he is buried exists. Ernest Palmer Marsh. He's the narrator in the graphic novel. The use of a narrator allowed me to abbreviate the story and bring readers up to speed on years of boom and bust in the lumber industry of Everett. He was someone that I saw as respected, and he struck me as tireless, passionate, altruistic, enthusiastic, idealistic, hopeful, and I think he's the unsung hero of Everett. My dad helped me get a more fleshed out picture of his life after he left Everett, which was around 1925. He lived and worked in various cities on the West Coast as a federal labor mediator. On July 13, 1934, he was traveling with a New York senator at a Seattle dock when their motorcade came under fire. Both survived the assassination attempt. In 1942, he was living in San Francisco, and he died at the age of 85 in 1963 in Los Angeles. These are some other historical characters that prominently feature in the story. These are the lumber barons of Everett: David Clough, Roland Hartley, Joe Irving. These lumber barons were largely unsympathetic characters, and it was really difficult to understand their problems and tell their side of the story. In fact, focusing too much on them became a distraction, and I found it increasingly hard to tell the story of the average citizen and be fair when I was considering these characters because they are so unsympathetic. So the way around that was fictional characters. Fictional characters allowed me to tell the side of the lumber baron, what he was up against. It allowed me to tell two sides of the story. So William Emery is the sympathetic lumber baron, the average boom and bust mill owner, of which there were many mills at the time in Everett. I think that I think those mill owners are completely lost in the story because they completely get eclipsed by the Roland Hartleys of the story. And riding in a small-time lumber baron at the bottom rung at that caste, the caste system, and having him interact with the real lumber barons was a delicious treat that I actually savored. Alice represents the innocent citizen caught in the crossfire of the warring sides. Another issue that I had was in writing the characters, I had to pay attention to language to avoid sounding like myself or like a narrator in all the dialogue. And that forced me to take another creative choice, is how politically correct do I want to be with this? These are for some photo references that I just called off the internet for William Emery, Alice, and Elizabeth. William Emery, I think that's, you can see a little bit of a straw hat of one of the Blodells. The Blodells were also mill owners in southern Puget Sound at the time. So now I'm going to talk about the historic places that are featured in the graphic novel. And in the case of William C. Butler, I used his house to substitute him in the story. What this did was it gave me a perfect tie-in to historic properties in the graphic novel. We know Historic Everett is all about preserving historic properties as well. So it was to use William Butler's house instead of him was great because he was a recluse. He didn't get out much, so we just show the house. This one is at 1703 Grand Avenue. It's colonial revival style with federal features by A.F. Hyde and built in 1911. And it's just really ironic that it's now known as the Butler-Jackson House, and Jackson and Butler were absolutely political and social opposites. So it's kind of interesting aside on that little irony. Here is some of the houses that I worked into the backgrounds when the girls are walking the Bayside neighborhood. This is the Van Valey house. It was built in 1914 and is an example of American four-square design, inspired by the prairie style made popular by Frank Lloyd Wright. A.L. Van Valey owned a bottling company in Everett. This is the Roland Hartley Mansion, built in 1911. The architect is unknown, and it is built in a neoclassic style. It's perfect for someone with a Napoleonic complex. This is the First National Bank of Everett at the corner of Hewitt and Colby Avenue. The commercial club, which is where the mill owners at the time would kind of rub elbows and talk, occupied the top floor of the First National Bank. It's now torn down, lost to time, and a less characteristic B of A is standing there. But the commercial club struck me as a great place to disseminate important information about the lumber baron story. But since no photographic reference existed for the interior of the commercial club, I substituted the Everett Elks Club instead. This is the Interurban Depot. It is still standing at the corner of Colby and Pacific Avenue. The awning and sign are long gone, as is the lamp. This building now has 3 stories instead of 2. But the curved window for the train dispatcher is still visible if you were to go by and drive by it. It's a shadow of its former glory, but it's still an interesting building. It is historic, and it still stands, thankfully. Beverly Park. Beverly Park is a really important place in the story, and it is mentioned so often that it's almost its own character. I found this the perfect location to convey some of the fear and tension of the days leading up to the shootout. Beverly Park, in Walker C. Smith's book, conveys the bloodbath that occurred there on October 30th, 1916. It was absolutely grisly event with people and, well, men, they were all men, that were nearly beaten within inches of their lives. And most certainly, it was on everybody's lips in town at the time. Right now, the interurban bike trail goes through this area, and there's an electrical substation there. Also featured in the graphic novel are some locations in Seattle, such as the Seattle skyline. The Smith Tower was built in 1914, so it would have been an iconic landmark on the skyline back then. And also featured was the Seattle Lieber Temple exterior and Coleman Dock. So this is Everett City Dock, where the shootout occurred. The shootout occurred on the left side of the sign where you see the boat moored. This location is currently on Port of Everett property, and there is no public access. The closest that you can get to this location is the Anchor Tavern, which sits at the bottom of Hewitt Avenue. And in fact, they've just recently put a new historical marker out there, so I encourage everybody to go take a look at that. So after I had a clear understanding of the story and what happened, I began writing the script, first as notes in a notebook. Then I transcribed all my notes into a Word doc. The final script ended up looking like this. Each page of script is a page of the graphic novel, and each drawing or picture panel is numbered. Each piece of dialogue is also numbered, which will be put into word balloons. So this is a completely different type of script formatting than you would see for a movie script. And after I came up with this and finished it all and got my 24 pages, I showed it to Historic Everett. Actually, I acted it out in a restaurant, so that must have been really interesting. And they liked it. They were very enthusiastic, and I got the go-ahead to start drawing. So drawing, that was a big part of the process. And I'm grateful that I had the complete idiot's guide, because I would have just sat down and started drawing and then gotten confused, but that book helped me stay organized. But I did know that I wanted all the drawings to have a cinematic quality. For example, the scene in the commercial club, I really wanted that to have a dark film noir style. As well, I wanted to hide the faces of particular historical characters, so you really don't know which lumber baron hired those Pinkerton spies. So also I wrote describing camera angles and certain details of the scene that I wanted to draw. So this is a page of my sketchbook, and this is what the rough sketches look like. This was, since the script was properly formatted, it was really easy to draw in chronological order and see the page flow. Also, the space was left in the drawings for word balloons, and I constantly referred back to the script to see the order and the size of the dialogue that was going to be inserted into the drawing. My storyboarding experience also gave me a little heads up on what is called the action axis. The action axis is an invisible line that is drawn between two characters, and the point of view of the camera or the reader never crosses that line, because if you do cross that line, then the characters flip sides of the frame, and then people get confused and they don't know where they are in the scene. So that was really important. In fact, pretty much you see the guy always on one side of the frame, unless you see him change directions, and that's permissible. So after all the sketches were done, they were scanned into Photoshop and enlarged and printed out at 137%, so they were blown up, and then traced using a light table. And I put charcoal paper on that and used charcoal pencils to trace all my rough sketches. So this is the final drawing that you see. The resulting charcoal drawing is larger, and so it allowed me to put in a little bit more detail, and it helped me the tooth of the paper kind of fights you a little bit if you're trying to get a lot of detail, so it was good that I worked a little bit larger. I tried to do as much shading on the drawings as I could, so I could avoid doing a lot of post-processing in Photoshop. I used charcoal powder for the large shaded areas, and I used an eraser to cut in the highlights. So one of the creative issues or choices I had to make is, how do you deal with historical accuracy? Historical accuracy or good storytelling and composition. And you can see that what I chose. I chose composition and better storytelling over historical accuracy. And this is a great example of it. You can see the Verona on the left, and that picture was taken to reflect the actual tide that occurred during the Everett Massacre. So it was low tide, and you can see the bow stem sits much lower in the water than what I drew it. The bow sits a lot higher. And I did that because I wanted everybody to see the men on the Verona and to see the action of the shootout. So that was a creative choice that I made. Also, another choice that I made was, I guess we really don't know how many people were on the dock at the time of the shootout. We do know that Beard and Curtis, two of the deputies that were killed, were on the dock, as well as Sheriff Mcrae. So I decided to just simplify the drawing so that it was an easy read and just put those three people on the dock. So there's some great image reference available for some locations in the story, but not on others, not in others. For example, the Verona. There wasn't a whole lot of photographic reference of the interior of the Verona. So I just had to wing it. So another problem with historical accuracy is everybody knows these people, what they look like, and I had to draw them talking and smiling and carrying on with expression, and so I found that a little bit of a challenge to make these characters emote emotion, and also they have to look who they're supposed to be. So that was a bit of a challenge. All existing photographic reference for people were taken in portraiture, and they don't show that emotion or the correct head position or them talking or whatnot. But I will say that Sheriff Mcrae was really fun to draw because he was angry and drinking all the time and shouting. So I'm not sure if a highball glass was invented in 1916, but I wanted to show that this guy was a drinker, so I put a highball in his hand. So drawing historical buildings were also problematic because foliage has changed, current architecture features have been taken away or added and replaced over the years. Also accessibility. I couldn't photograph from the angles that I needed these buildings to be in because of cars or foliage or traffic or whatever. So in some cases, for example, the Hartley Mansion, I took a historical image and took it into Photoshop and warped it and forced it to be in the perspective that I needed it. And so you could see how this rough sketch ended up looking. It looks pretty kludged together, but when I traced it, it turned out okay. So another wonderful, fun thing to do was to pay attention to period details, particularly dress and architectural features such as window frames and light fixtures. And I found that with the charcoal and the black and white, a lot of these architectural details really added a lot of ambiance to the whole thing. Hats were a big deal for men back at the time, and they wore hats practically all the time, which was a nice shortcut because then I didn't have to draw a lot of hairstyles. I'd just take a couple hats and put it on them. Also, the sailor type of collar was really fashionable for women at the time, and I really liked that, and so it was fun to work that in. And as far as light fixtures and window frames and doors, all I had to do was look around my own house, which was built in 1908. So after all of the drawings were done, and everything was pretty much drawn twice, once as a rough sketch and then as a final charcoal illustration, then I had to take 98 drawings and put it into a booklet for printing, and that was a bit of a daunting task. So I made full use of Adobe Creative Suite, Photoshop for the scanning, the process of the drawings, contrast and correction of the image. I tried to avoid as much post-processing in Photoshop because that would just take a really long time. And I used Illustrator for vector drawings, for flourishes, particularly in the cover of it, and specialized balloons. And I used InDesign to put all of it in the booklet form, and that was a great tool. Unfortunately, I didn't know how to use it, so I went and did some online tutorials. So actually, it was really wonderful. Lynda.com was great for artists who have software they don't know how to use, or they want to find some detail and learn how to use some advanced feature they don't know how to use. So another great thing I found on lynda.com was a tutorial on word balloons, and I had no idea what I was getting into as far as word balloons. There are a lot of rules about word balloons. How to miter corners, how far they can break from one panel into the next, how much margin the type needs around, between the balloon and the type. And in fact, there are so many rules about word balloons that the Eisner Awards, which is kind of like the Oscars of graphic novels, they have a category for type and word balloons. So it's a big deal. Oops. So one of the rules in graphic novels is the use of the uppercase I. This is a little bit of a gotcha because all fonts that you use for graphic novels are all uppercase, and so it's really easy for that I with the serif on the top and the bottom to get squeezed in. But you never see an I like that unless a character is speaking in first person. I did this. It doesn't even matter if it's at the beginning of a sentence. You just never see it with the serifs unless a character is talking about himself. And indeed, there's other problems with that uppercase font, and one of them was Mcrae with a small c. So I was trying really hard, well, how do I solve this problem? There's no small c in this font. And I experimented with many different ways, and in the end, I could not worm my way out of it. I had to find every time Mcrae's name turned up and make that C a small by lowering the point size of the font. So it was kind of a tedious job. So also there's all kinds of rules about tails, how long they can be, where do they point to, where do they start from. So these were other things. I mean, I had no idea when I went into this, there were so many rules. But also with word balloons, I had to be able to communicate tone of voice, volume of voice. And so those were all things that I had to think about and play with. Also, sound effects. The last few pages of the graphic novel was nothing but sound effects. And so I had to have fun with that as well. So now we get into the printing process. After everything had been laid out in InDesign, It was time to go to print, and this scared me more than anything because printing is not my world. I deal with pixels, not ink dots. So I was a little bit scared of this process, and there was a little bit of experimentation going on. Since we were just using black ink in the process, I didn't have the advantage of the CMY part. And when you take CMYK and make it all black, it's a richer black than if you're just using black ink. So there was a lot of experimentation. I handed it off to the printers. I didn't get a galley back before they printed them all out, and I just crossed my fingers and prayed. And in the end, it turned out okay. I got the blacks I wanted. And it was very important for me to see the charcoal paper. So when I was experimenting, I didn't want to brighten up the images so much that everything turned white and you didn't see the paper texture. And likewise, I wanted the blacks to be a nice, rich black, but I didn't want them to look gray. And so it was a balance I had to strike. So even though the results were relatively unknown at the time, I said my prayer and the gods of print smiled upon me, and it turned out okay. So without a doubt, this graphic novel, creating it, has been the most challenging piece I've ever done as a professional artist. There were lots of interesting creative choices that I had no idea I would have to make. For example, being historically accurate or politically correct or any of that stuff. But I did get the opportunity to stretch myself more, and I'm extremely grateful to Historic Everett for the opportunity that they gave me and wanting to partner with me on this project. It was our combined love of Everett's history that made this project possible, so I give them plenty of thanks. Thanks also to the Everett Public Library for inviting me to talk today. And also, I want to remind everybody that Historic Everett is having a Everett Massacre event on November 3rd at 5:30 p.m. at the Anchor Tavern. Andrea's holding up a poster of it right now. They're having a wonderful event to commemorate the Everett Massacre. There's going to be a buffet. Steve Bertrand is going to talk about the events of November 5th, 1916. There'll be trivia, songs commemorating the Everett Massacre, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So I want to thank everybody for coming here today and listening to my talk, and I would like to open the floor up for some Q&A, and after which I will sign books. Yeah. Now
that you've had all this wealth of experience, are you going to channel it into another graphic novel?
Yes. It was a lot of fun. Yes, I plan on doing another one. It means more research, but I don't know whether I'll do an Everett one or Lowell. Oh, I'm going to have to look into that.
Centralia Massacre, just a couple years.
You know, I thought about that one, the Centralia Massacre. That's an interesting subject. I know that they...
You can have early on horseback, rearing up and graphics can be wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, Edgar Houghton's role about the Everett Massacre, did you see that book at all?
Yeah, I think we have it. Don't we have...
It's Edgar Houghton.
Edgar Houghton. No, actually, no, I haven't heard of that one. Is that available at the library? Okay.
Where are your original drawings kept?
The library is going to display some of them. Bookend Cafe, which is also selling the graphic novel, is going to display some of them, and also I have them at home as well. You know, I love Everett even more. I mean, every time I read Milltown, it's just so interesting, the characters and the places. I think it really strengthened my love for Everett, and the enthusiasm that I got from the community has just been overwhelming. They've just been very welcoming and excited and supportive, and yeah, it's been great. I feel more fond and more connected, actually.
Well, we're going to keep you.
I'm sorry?
We're going to keep you.
Yeah, well, Everett has a lot of great chapters in history that warrant a graphic novel.
And with her husband, of course.
Yeah. He's been very, very patient and stuff.
Well, in your research, did you find any references to Frederick Trump, since it's topical?
Frederick.
Donald.
Oh, Donald Trump. Someone needs to fix this mic. Will you fix this mic? Just kidding. You know, I pretty much finished it before the election got into full swing. It was about 2 or 3 months of research, intensive research, and then I would say it was probably about 6 months of drawing, from the rough sketches to the final sketches, and then it took a long time to get everything scanned in and in an electronic format, and that was another couple months. So from top to bottom, I would say it was about 9 months. I used the books. The books were great, but it was great to talk to David Dilgard. And if any of you are doing history about Everett, he's the guy to talk to. Yeah, it's really good. So I used that, yeah. And then also there's some great online resources. I forgot the name of that website. It was historylink.org. That was fantastic as well. Those were great to get an abbreviated story.
Did you have a lot of experience using charcoal already?
Yeah, I did, actually. Charcoal's so wonderful. It's so pliable. You get your hands into it, and I really loved it. Yeah. I mean, I'd never done any graphic novels or cartoons or any of that sort of thing in charcoal before. But I knew that it would work well because there's some storyboard illustrators that work in charcoal. In fact, some of my mentors have. Diane.
Deb, Persepolis, which was about a young girl caught up in the Iranian Revolution, went from a graphic novel to a Meryl Streep and other actresses, or I think it's Catherine Deneuve, animated feature. Could you ever see something like this wonderful novel you've produced become an animated novel?
From your lips to God's ears. I think it would be, yeah, it would be really fun. A lot of work, though. Yeah, a lot of work. That's like, you need a team of artists to do that. So maybe someday. Yeah.
I caught a word there that was kind of fascinating. Storyboard. What is that original?
Gee whiz. Well, storyboards are just a pre-visualization, a drawing pre-visualization of a movie. And I don't know where the word came from, but I do know it's a term that's been used in the movie business and film business for a long time. And it just allows the director to take a script and pre-visualize it. And, when there's a lot of pre-visualization, it kind of helps the crew figure out like how high is the camera crew going to put the camera, etc. So it's just part of pre-planning.
Nice term.
Yeah, I wish I could take credit for it, but it's been around for a while. Yeah.
How are the labor situations of people involved in the Everett Massacre similar to labor situations
it just seems like it's like the age-old struggle. Workers want to get paid more for their work, and a lot of industrialists just don't want to pay it or can't pay it, or they have some problems that the workers aren't privy to. And I hope that by telling William Emery's story that people understand that lumber barons also had their own struggles that they were dealing with. I think that the Everett lumber barons, they're so unsympathetic, and they were quite, they weren't very transparent about the problems that they were having. So they came up as kind of cutthroat industrialists that just didn't care about their workers. But yet there were lots and lots of mill owners at the time. And in this graphic novel, I'm supposing that there's one of them that did care about his workers. And we do know that Mark Reed down in Shelton cared for his workers, or tried to, give them better bunks at the camp, better food at the camps. And so you don't hear about those guys in Everett doing that sort of thing. So.
Actually, Clyde Walton Lumber was a great man of honor, and he also lived in the Rocker Mansion.
That's a nice house.
Yeah.
Well, maybe the next graphic novel.
Workers there respected him so much that they named their kids after him.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah.
Yeah, Deb, really appreciate this. I had no idea it was so meticulous, but I want to encourage you, if you haven't done so already, I don't know if there are awards given for historically themed graphic novels, but I would encourage you to go for that.
Yeah, I hope to, yeah. Thank you for the encouragement. I entered it for a Washington Zine Award, so we'll see what happens. It's it's a short, it's short for magazine. It's a short press run, so we'll see. No, it is specifically for Washington history. So I figure Everett Massacre, Washington history, let's give it a shot. So if there's no more questions, I just want to thank everybody for coming and giving up their Saturday. Thank you.